Meanwhile, back to the show. The first speaker that I would like to invite on air, she's got a really, really interesting heritage, and she's doing great things and impacting people by storytelling. And she confessed that she's not exactly a natural born salesperson. And let's find out how she's doing right now. So please put your hands together and welcome Yasmin Khater. It's so good to see you again, Yasmin.
Great to see you as well. Thank you for having me, Remy and Irene.
So time is always precious with all of our speakers. So let's get on with your story to share. So like I mentioned before I brought you in, you confess that you're not exactly a natural born salesperson, but you're doing great things right now. So what are your humble beginnings like, Yasmin?
Well, it started off with actually growing up in a cross-cultural home. My parents were very different, and I grew up in Saudi Arabia. So it was always a sign that no matter what, I was different. So my way of coping with it was to be very quiet. But unfortunately, when I was 14, my dad lost his job.
Right.
And money became very tight because we have 3 kids in one household. So similar to Irene was sharing, it was really not very pleasant. And my mom didn't want to tell us no, that you can't do things. So she encouraged us to go ahead and to start selling. And at the time, I was making jewelry and paintings. And she was like, well, if you want to go to classes, you got to pay for it. And I remember thinking, pay for it? Like, what do you mean? At the time, I had 2 friends. So the idea of speaking to people gave me massive anxiety. But at the same time, it was like, do I love painting or do I love being afraid? And it always boils down to having a bigger desire that makes you want to choose something different, and to realize that it's either I choose rejection of what I want or I get rejection from people around me. But it's a choice that we have to make. And for me, I learned to realize that I was being called by other things. And I started to get more and more comfortable. And of course, I made so many mistakes. But one of the things I love about sales is like you're always learning how to be better. And there's always things about knowing human behavior that makes it easier and easier over time.
I like the sound of that, because all it took was a bit of a situation back home in the down low where your father lost your job, and your family told you, look, if you want to go back to school, you got to do something for yourself. So you started selling at the age of 14, and you mentioned art and jewelry with 2 friends.
No. So I only had 2 friends. So it's not like I had a big social life where I could go and ask people. I didn't like people. I was very anxious around people. So trying to go and learn how to sell when you're anxious is not a
good
very
idea
state to be. Yeah.
But are you still in touch with those 2 friends? Just so I know.
Actually, I am.
That's fantastic. You don't lose friends, do you? That's really, really, really awesome. Just like and those are the friends that really, really stick with you through good and the bad, right? So at the same time, at the age of 14, and you've been selling all this while, and what are the things that you've encountered to make yourself better? So by observing people, and what else can you share?
So initially I thought a sale was about convincing someone, but actually a sale has nothing to do about convincing. A sale is really about listening. Half of the time you're listening to people's limitations, to their own fears. And the more you're in touch with your own limitations and your own fears, the more you can show up very compassionate to understand where they're coming from. And the moment you stop making it all about convincing and making it all about how can I really truly listen, and how can I, if I can support them. If I cannot, to tell them, hey, I'm not the right fit, and then to walk away. And that requires a little bit of leadership to be able to lead that conversation. That requires courage to say, hey, I'm not the best person, and that's also okay, because we are all raised in environments where we're always told that we must do good, but sometimes if we cannot help them, we need to move on. And that's what's important, that we listen to what someone is saying, and if we have something that's clear for them, we can actually support them.
That's really, really awesome. So selling is not about convincing, but listening. This is one of the key takeaways in the first few minutes of the conversation with you already. And you see, I also know that one of your sharing is this. So at one's point of life, right, he or she may just hit a roadblock or brick wall that makes them feel frustrated or maybe feel that they're stuck without progress in these three very important I's, which is impact, influence, and income. And when that happens, what are the possible solutions for them to get out of this mess?
So the key thing is to realize that when we look at nature, nature always changes. And that for me is always a reminder that where you are today is where you are today. It is not where you're going to be tomorrow. And the reason why it has the three I's of impact, influence, and income, because it all starts with you. Like, what do I want? What do I desire? And sometimes what we desire and where we want to go, there's a massive gap, because what we desire, it might be like way above what's possible. Like I know that, for example, for me, I've had in my business when I first started, I didn't manage money correctly. So it's like I wanted this, so I was spending like this, but I wasn't there yet.
Oh,
so you
no.
have to realize that, like, oh wow, like, it's okay. We have to honor what we desire, and we need to like build that muscle so that we start to believe it's possible for us. And that's why it always comes with getting clear. What do I desire? What do I want? And then what do I believe is possible? And how can I constantly, break what I think is possible over and over again to make things happen? Like I remember, like very similar to Irene's story, like having some months where I was really broke.
Right.
And within a year, I made what I made in a year in a month. And that was just like mind blowing, because it was like, oh, I wanted to have that peace and that freedom, and I got it. And then I started to feel like, oh my gosh, this is possible. I got scared, and I ended up having a very negative behavior. So all that we have to do is to realize that it all comes from listening to what we actually desire and giving ourselves permission to think that, hey, I'm allowed to have those things. I'm allowed to go after those. And what do I want to choose each time and each day? Because you're going to have some days where are really shit. Like for me, I've been sick. I've taken care of my dad and my auntie who both had cancer. And when you're a caregiver, it is a horrible experience. So there's some days where like they're really hard, but it's also how we choose to continue the next day and the day after. And when you have those low moments, you're allowed, because sometimes it's a lot to process. But at one point or another, do we want to go beyond that? Do we want to choose again and again? And that's what's important.
You see, this also reminds me of the topic of shifting of mindset, which we'll be hearing from Siva later on in the show. So what has shifting mindset, like being from fearful of, also correlating to Karen's topic of the fear of overcoming failure. So you've gone through all that, but have a look at you, you're shining right now. So with all that happening to you, something good came out of it. But just before we move on to the next exciting thing about Yasmin, so there's some comments from Irene saying that sales is about listening with compassion. What a way to go with that. And how do you feel about that line from Irene right there?
Yeah, it is. And that's why, like, when we shifted from thinking a sale is like convincing to listening with compassion, it's a very different energy in a conversation.
So Yasmin, if you can just share an example that you use active listening to convince one of the most meaningful sales you've come across. Would you like to share one of those experiences with us, please?
Yeah, so I'll share the one that happened actually only 2 days ago. Not the most meaningful, but there's so many, so it's hard to pick one. But I went into a meeting with a client, and they were saying, oh, our sales team is really, really stressful. And I was like, And then I was like, tell me more. And it's like, yeah, they want us to do like coaching for them on like how do they manage their employees, and they want coaching around like their performance in the company. And I was like, okay. And then in the end, when I'm hearing that, I'm not hearing that they're being a pain. I'm hearing that globally around the world, people are being laid off.
Oh dear.
So when they're asking for coaching around their performance, it's because they are worried if I don't have that support, I will be fired.
Right.
So if you want to support your sales team and help them sell more, but they're operating with extreme anxiety, it is very hard for them to do that. It's very hard for them to want to show up and do things differently because they're not operating from a place of possibility.
Correct.
They're operating from a place of like, I have a mortgage, I have kids, and people are being laid off, not one, not two, but hundreds of thousands in the past few weeks. And you're asking me something that like, that's not a priority to me. I'm prioritizing my safety and security right now.
Right.
That's what I mean by like listening with compassion, because it's easy to judge someone for whatever state they're in, but oftentimes they're operating out of there because of a lot of unspoken programming that if you listen to and you understand what's coming up, is not because they're bad, it's because they're having pain.
Right.
And they're speaking from that pain.
So after hearing all the solutions, we won't dive deep into what sort of secrets and solutions you have for them, but I'm sure you have a happy outcome for this group of salespeople. So,
oh no, we haven't worked together yet. We're just going to start. But
right.
But just to give you a context, but because of the act of listening, the regional HR manager was saying this last 10 minutes have been more powerful than like the last hour with the last vendor. And it's because I'm listening to not what is being said, but what is being said under the surface.
You see, Yasmin, I'm just so proud that you brought this idea of active listening to the higher management of the company you're working with, making sure that they're realizing what's lacking in the environment. And this is something that a lot of management should really take time to take a step back to listen to what the employees are after, instead of just pushing them for KPIs and doing good for the company, but at the stake of the mental health and the well-being as individuals. But I suspect you are speaking on behalf of this organization that you've created called Sales Story Lab. And I've been reading about your achievements, all the good things your clients have been saying about you. I even recognize some of them, which includes Miss Catherine Wu from Talent 33. I had the pleasure of speaking to her when I was going for the SG United Train and Place program with Boston Consulting Group, and I was selected by her. But things turned out the other way around. Instead of Boston Consulting Group, I chose Korn Ferry Academy, and that's where I got to meet Irene. See, things happen for a reason, right, Irene? But wow, with all these great people saying wonderful results they're receiving from their sales strategy and techniques from Sales Story Lab. So tell us, what sort of method is Sales Story Lab sharing with us? I'm sure the name of the company is sort of giving things away. It's about storytelling. So tell us, how can we rock our storytelling, Yasmin?
Yeah, so for me, it's a little bit deeper than just telling stories, because we are all telling stories. We're all natural at telling stories. If you have a friend, if you are married, if you have had a job, then you can tell stories. But the distinction for us is, how do you tell stories that can sell? And that requires us to understand the brain, understand how the brain has changed in the past 5 to 7 years. And also, what does it mean in terms of how we communicate? Because we need to understand that component. And the second thing is, how do we actually be effective at getting a point across? And people will say, I'm a great storyteller. I'm like, cool. Like, but are you living the life that you want to live? And if it's not, then you don't know how to tell good stories that sell. You can tell stories to entertain, but it's a different muscle to build a story that sell. So the starting point is always understanding the brain. And I'm a trained psychologist. This has been really helpful that I come through that perspective. And then the second thing is also to realize that when you're crafting a narrative, it's really about bringing a customer down a rabbit hole. Because when they have too many options, they can't decide. So you have to hold their hand and help them decide. So the second case, after understanding what is going on, you need to be able to build a case on why your option is the best option. And anything we talk about can build a case. So for example, like we have in the room, we have Phil Mary, and Phil talks about synchronicity, which I love. But like, we can build that case in so many different ways. We can build that case in innovation. We can build a case in, oh, hi, Phil. We can build the case in terms of having self-faith and how to lead more effectively. And like, so his way of teaching is one powerful tool, but how he positions it and how he sells it will be different, because this tool can do so much. But if you like build the case that people want, then it becomes easier for them to be like, yes, I need that. Because a lot of people don't know a lot of things. So if you tell them, oh, I do this, and then they don't understand, they will say no because they don't understand, not because they don't want it. And that's what us as leaders, we need to be able to communicate that clearly and to own up to it. And the final part is, how do we create places that are very safe for them to decide and to choose? Because sometimes they should choose no, and sometimes they should choose
right.
yes. And it's nothing wrong or right, but it's for us to help them create safe spaces to help them move forward.
Yeah, I like the word for safe spaces as well. If I can paraphrase you correctly, see, there are many, many good tools which is available for people to sell. But what you want to do is to use that idea and that tool to customize it to your client's need and wants, so then they know what to do with the tools, basically. And to convince them that this is the best solution because I've checked your background, I've done all my background checks, I've done all my understanding about what you really want, and this is the best possible solution. And you can do that by storytelling, by understanding your client, by understanding how this tool can help that client. Have I understand the concept correctly?
Yeah, 100%.
Oh, fantastic. So Irene is just having a small request on the chat group saying that, can you give us one example of your successful, happy client, maybe share a story? And she also made a comment saying that in agreement with you, safe space is a very, very powerful thing.
Yeah, so I'm going to give you an example of one of my multinational clients, and I'll give you another example of an entrepreneur client. So you can see both worlds depending on where you're listening it from. So one of my multinational clients, they're a very big tech company. And they help companies accelerate through using technology in their marketing, sales, analytics, and so forth. They do many things. So one of the salespeople that I was working with, very beautiful, beautiful guy, he was like telling his customer, we worked with a customer and we helped them go from where they were to having 2,000% growth.
2,000% growth?
Yeah. They're working with like an Asian-based unicorn. So when you are a growing company, you can grow at 2,000%. But when you tell that story, I'm going to leave out names for confidentiality reasons. You go to a multinational who is growing at maybe, for example, per year, at most 1 to 2%.
Right.
And you tell them 2,000% growth, they have lost trust. They do not listen to you. They don't understand what you're talking about. And they think this is some young punk telling me some new tool and doesn't understand what I'm going through. And that is creating, for that person who's listening to it, a very unsafe space, because he's thinking or she's thinking, this won't work for me. It's not relevant to my industry. I don't want to be the sucker who pushes for this and pays the bill and then fail. And so many layers of having their insecurities come out, right? There's an example of an extreme case where if you do that, you're not going to have that customer because you've triggered them to think that's insane. Like I only see 1-2%, and you're telling me 2,000%. I can't even imagine.
They can't correlate it. They can't piece one and one together. No way.
So then that's an example. But for those who are working with entrepreneurs, like with like small businesses and so forth, one example, I'm working with a company and they are in real estate developments. Right. And they've grown. So like it's working. But then they're like, but will it keep on working? Right. And that's like an internal story within the team. And because they're having this internal story, the first layer, which is impacting their sales, is an inner narrative of the team. Because if you're questioning, is it going to work? You are not going to show up, speak to customers and sell. It's a very simple thing, right? But because for them, they think, oh my gosh, we made X amount of money. We were lucky. And that actually is a limiting story when we say we are lucky. Because, if you're lucky, you're not lucky every day. So you might as well have a hard time with that. So with this specific team, when we made the safe space for everyone in the sales team to feel comfortable, it became like, actually, where do we want to go? Where are we heading off to as well? And once we have that and everyone knew where they're going, everyone knew what to focus on. What happened this past year is they've already doubled in size. Excellent. And we're not talking about a small company, we're talking about a $10 million to $20 million company. That's amazing. And it's because what's happening is they were not feeling safe.
And you see, Yasmin, this brings back to the first point, just to wrap things up a little bit. It's not about convincing your customers, but active listening to know what they want and where they're at. and listening is one of the key takeaways. So Yasmin, we've run out of time. If there's one last thing you want to share with your audiences, but the most impactful thing you want to share, what will it be, Yasmin? Take it away.
I would say give yourself grace. We are all on a journey. We're all at different chapters. Where you are is where you are, and you have to honor it. When you look at people around you who may be perhaps 5, 10, 20 steps ahead of you, and you think that you're bad, you're not bad. You're at just a different chapter. So we need to always remember, we've got to be clear, where are we going? What is my vision? What do I want to create? And live on that playbook and not on the playbook of someone else's. And then to realize that every day I must choose. Every day I must decide. And it's hard. You're going to have days where you don't want to do it, but we need to choose and decide because it's only one life to live. And that's yours to create.
Yasmin, such beautiful sharing. Please stick around for the Q&A at the end of the session. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Yasmin Khater, a round of applause for her, please.